Okay, so we are now recording.
Oh,
Just so everybody knows, normally there's a announcement in the channel. I'll just deal with any background noise on my end. But yeah.
cool.
So I'm expecting, oh, there's Beast. Hey, Beast.
Hi.
Let's-
There's off.
yeah, he's got his mic muted for the moment, but yeah, Beast, I sent you a sort of a meme about wolves and them having invented the game of fetch. They were playing it when we discovered them, apparently, rather than having to wait for humans with hands to throw sticks for them. They were doing that on their own. And then recently, Beast, oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. He said they play it with each other in Ravens. I've been in touch with a feral human in the outback of Quebec, who I'm hoping to interview maybe sometime in the coming week, Zvonko Obrevek. And Zvonko is a feral human. He lives out in the nothing in a cabin he built surrounded by animals that hunt humans and stuff. And I thought you might find it interesting that when we were talking a couple nights ago, I've known him for about 10 years. We've had a few long conversations. He's very unusual. He's Croatian, older Croatian guy. And we were talking the other night, and he said, I don't have much time. I have appointment. I'm like, oh, yeah? Like, yes, I have appointment. Like, okay, so you're out in the middle of nothing in the snow in Quebec, and you have appointment? He's like, yes, I have wolves. There are 4 wolves in front, about half-mile away. There are 7 to the left. There are 2 to the right. There are 4 behind me, about 4 miles. I have to go meet them. We talk. I'm like, okay, so you talking to the wolves? He's like, yes, we talk. I'm like, well, so, I asked him, well, I'd be really, I have a request. He said, what is it? I said, I want you to ask the wolves if they will come to me in my dreaming and teach me wolf things. And he said, oh, for that, I must find White Wolf, Shaman Wolf. I only see him, once, twice a year. But I will remember and ask him. Well, okay. So I'm like, what do you talk about? And he's like, well, we don't talk. And I said, but you said that you're going to go talk with them. He said, I did not mean talk. I meant we dance around and howl and go crazy together in the snow. Hmm. So yeah, apparently Zvonko's out there with some, undomesticated wild canines. And I'm really hoping to get an interview with him because he's a wildly unusual human being. I said, so you have friends out there? He said, I don't have friends. I prefer enmity and isolation. No, 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 that's not what he said. He said, I prefer animosity and isolation. It was a very important difference.
Did you ask him why?
Oh, I know why. I mean, it's for the same reason we're having this meeting right now. Yeah, he's well aware that what the humans do in cities has very little to do with being alive or being human or being intelligent or anything. So he doesn't want any part of that at all. The only part of that,
City life is thoroughly alienating and isolating, I find.
Yeah. Yeah, so he wants no part of that. He's married. I asked him, Zvonko, when was the last time you kissed a woman? Except not in that accent. And he said, oh, yeah, last week. I'm like, oh, yeah? He's like, yeah. I'm like, who? He's like, my wife. You see her on Facebook, my page. She come out here. I'm like, oh, great. That's awesome. I'm glad. And it's like, why you ask about this? And I said, well, I have to answer him very carefully or he'll mess with me. I said, well, a woman's love is like oxygen or the stars in the night sky or the cry of a wild animal you cannot identify. And he said, oh, I understand. You're a poet.
What do you think his reason for messing with you is?
Well,
your words. Yeah.
I think weirdly and somehow accidentally, certainly not intentionally, I managed to acquire his respect and admiration based on my posts on Facebook, which, of course, as any of you who see those posts know, have almost nothing to do with anything personal about me and have a lot to do with insight or cognition, language. And he used to teach math at the university, maybe in Calgary, but I'm not sure. And so he was a math teacher, and he feels essentially assaulted by me. He's like, I did not choose mathematics. Mathematics was forced upon me. Theories come to me in the night and harass me. They beat me up in my mind. But yeah, I think I acquired his respect. So when we talk, it resembles something more like a Zen Mondo between us, a couple of Zen teachers or something, right? Where we're kind of, you know, he said, he asked me questions like, tell me something you don't know. And I said, I don't think there is anything that I actually know. And he says, that is something you know. Tell me something you don't know.
What did you say to him?
I said, well, no, what I'm trying to say is that I don't really trust knowledge much at all. I understand how it works, but I don't think it's authoritative.
Yeah. Right.
And so the last time we talked a couple days ago, he said, what is the truth? And I said, I don't remember exactly what I said, but it was something like, the truth is like a ray of light from the divine that is both urgently pursued and simultaneously unknowable. And then I said, Svanko. He's like, yes. I'm like, what is a lie? And he got a funny look on his face and he said, no one ever asked me this question before. No one asked me this. I'm going to have to meditate on that. I mean, he could have just said human civilization. It's a big lie. We're never civilized. We're not civilized now and never civilized before.
Well, I mean, that would be an interesting thing for us to talk about too. What is a lie? I mean, you can say what I would think about it, but what do you think about it?
Um, I don't want to be, what's the right word? I don't want to be a curmudgeon, but I think that if we intend to have a deep topic, a deep conversation about something, we should probably, we should resist the urge to believe that we know what words mean. because they certainly don't mean their senses in the dictionary. So what we have to do if we're going to be intelligent together is to playfully and perhaps cunningly explore why we're asking something and what in this conversation we intend to mean by certain terms. Does that make sense?
Sure.
It's like I was talking with Lee last night, and we actually talked about 19 other things. I'm not sure we actually got to this topic, but um, I introduced the idea of the relationship of intellect to dreaming. And I sort of knew what I meant by intellect, but I quickly realized that in order for this conversation to become interesting or meaningful, we'd have to define our terms much more carefully, especially that, like what is meant by intellect.
Did you settle on something as a definition?
No, because we ended up pursuing wild other topics such as snake cheese, Medusae, even the snake in Genesis, women milking snakes. Jesus is actually cheese bait. We just mispronounced his name because it was actually originally cheeses. The human addiction to cheese, how people really get depressed if it becomes clear that cheese will not be available. You know, you go to a party, there's no cheese, you're out of there. I mean, yeah, we had some crazy. I took some notes on the try and write a comedy routine about the snake milk thing because it has a lot to do with what Amon Hillman's talking about with the Medusae and Medea and the origins of medicine and stuff. And I think those ladies, they were milking snakes. I don't mean to be pornographic about it, but they were straight up milking snakes.
And snakes have milk?
Well, even if we suppose that snakes don't have milk. So first of all, a lot of people don't know this, but rattlesnakes give birth to live young.
Yeah.
But even if we decide that you can't actually get milk from snake tits, there are two other important possibilities. And the first one is the milk of their anciently evolved intelligence and memory. And the second one, which is straight up physically real, is that humans milk them for the venom to produce antidotes.
Right.
And that venom is often milky.
Yeah, they call it milk.
Mm-hmm.
The snake.
Exactly. So, you know,
so metaphorically or actually.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah,
there was a guy on, I think it was Stan Lee's Superhumans, really neat show from some years back, who injected himself with snake venom. One kind was actually black mamba venom, which is supposed to render you like neurologically paralyzed and dead within half an hour or something. And he was able to basically not have his brain be negatively affected by it. So he would like sit in front of a camera with a nurse beside them and inject himself with black mamba venom quite a lot. And other than a lesion at the site of injection, he seemed perfectly fine, which I found interesting.
It's well known that ancient people, and there are a few people walking around today, I think there's one guy who's fairly famous. It could be the guy you're talking about, might be a different guy as well. But what Amon Hillman regularly talks about is women who were both immune to the venoms of various lethal snakes via the titrated introduction of venoms into their bloodstream over time, and could also convey immunity to these venoms which is, at least in one place, perhaps with Paul in the Bible, discussed as one of the gifts of the Spirit of Christ, or the divine beings, to be immune to snake venom.
Do you think, and just because I don't know how this just information I had, this was explained, I mean, I know homeopathically, this is just me guessing, homeopathically, you can have not one element of the cure, which is actually would, if you did have any elements of it, be the cause of similar experiences or problems that the body has. But with homeopathy, it, you can very often get rid of the very problem that the actual elements in the cure, which is, say, titrated or something, to the point that there's not one molecule of it left. And I'm kind of wondering if, I know energetic healing exists, and I wonder if somebody who had exposed themselves to the snake venoms, and I guess at the time that was something, people were being bitten regularly by snakes, I guess, it wouldn't have been such a big deal. Can be in a similar way that somebody who develops an immunity no longer has any of it in them, but has the experience of having it in them. And whether, if you're a healer, you can energetically convey that essence, so to speak, of the experience to another person. I mean, did they talk about how, was there anything, how that was conveyed?
Yes. So, vaccines began in a similar fashion. They were aware of some humans in ancient Greece were aware of this technology. There's also stories of cowherd women in India, perhaps 3,000 years ago, taking the pus from smallpox lesions on cows, diluting it, placing it on bandages, scratching people's skin surfaces, and wrapping them in the bandages to convey immunity to smallpox, or at least a reduced response. As far as homeopathy goes, we have a huge problem there because actual studies of it have not revealed any effect. So if we're paying attention to the science, realizing that science isn't always the right lens to look with, there's a problem there. Also, there's another problem, which is that if homeopathy were real, what would have to cause the medicine to become medicinal is not merely the exposure to the substance, because if the homeopathic theorem was true, everything we eat would have homeopathic levels of billions of substances in it, right? Which would leave us with two problems. The first one being, in that kind of a situation, how is it that the little pills actually have any effect at all when we're living in a manifold of swarming homeopathic energetic signatures, right? See the problem?
Well, I actually don't actually see that necessarily as a problem, because the way I look at it is that we are prepared. In other words, we've grown up with, and we have existed with, eating things that are of value to us, and that we use the necessary parts of. We're not, assuming processed foods or anything, but the whole foods, we do that. The substances that are used in homeopathy are 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 not those things. They are actually poisons that we avoid, and that our experience, I mean, if we did run into some of those things and eat them, we could die potentially. Or, I mean, it's a similar, it's supposed to be similar, whatever would cause something similar to the disease or the problem that you're treating with homeopathy is in itself, if it were ingested, potentially poisonous. And the reason, and that according to homeopathy, and I'm not well studied on it, I have had positive results, according to homeopathy, those are the substances that are basically potentized, and actually supposed to be the most potent according to homeopathy, by the degree to which they are kind of shaken into the sugar mixture or whatever, to the point that there is literally not one molecule left of the actual substance. So it seems to be that it's the memory, in essence, the signature of the substance that remains in homeopathy. And homeopathy, from my understanding of how it works, is the remedies or the cures or whatever, what it offers is the thing that if you did ingest it as a poison or toxin would cause the very symptoms that you're trying to alleviate. So it's a different kind of a thing. It's the signature, so to speak, of it. And if you, I don't know, if you pay much attention to, to the whole Emoto stuff, or what you think about that, with the water retaining, the quality of even a thought, or a word, or a whatever, and its structure, it basically supposes that there is a sensitivity to things that can encode that kind of thing. So that's my understanding of what homeopathy is. And this is just me, it's my little commercial for oscillococcinum. I have not had a flu in over 30 years. And I had a acupuncturist tell me about oscillococcinum many years ago. And if I take that at the first sign of anything, I don't get it. So I've never had a flu shot. I never had a flu, not in 30 years. And before that, I would have them maybe once a year, once every couple of years. So to me, it seems to work, because every time I do take it, it literally gets rid of it. So it's right.
Okay, well, that was an interesting presentation. So first of all, one of the originary principles of medicine is precisely the principle you describe here, where an extremely small titration of a substance that would be harmful produces the opposite result and therefore can act as an antidote to that substance. However, it should be clear that the one thing the oxalotocin, or whatever that stuff's called, does not contain is flu viruses. So I'm not sure.
No,
I'm
it's
not.
the symptoms. It's the homeopathy is
Got it.
about. It's
Got it.
different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me continue. So the concept in homeopathy is that you place one or more substances. I mean, there's a vast lexicon of symptoms and diseases, and then there are, along with those symptoms and diseases, are the substances that are used homeopathically to treat them. And then those substances are placed in a solution, extremely minute titrations or dilutions of those substances, extremely minute, are placed in like a 5-gallon, container of water, and then I don't know, one droplet of that is placed in a second 5-gallon container, then one and mixed, and then one droplet of that, and so forth and so on. Now they make the pills out of the resulting stuff. Now, I think you either ignored or you just didn't care about what I said, which was that if homeopathy were real, then the unimaginable cloud of extremely minute amounts of every substance on Earth that we are swimming in would constantly be affecting us. And even if it weren't, how could it possibly be true that the minute amounts of zero amount, actually, what you have is energetic memory of some substance in a pill, right? So there's nothing in that pill. Energetic memory of some substance. Well, we are swimming in gajillions.
Now I didn't get it.
Yeah, we are swimming in gajillions of situations where the energetic memory of substances is everywhere in every glass of water we drink, in every piece of food we eat, in the air we breathe, in everything that we're exposed to all day long, so that if homeopathy were true, all of those things should affect us, right? And more problematically, how possibly could the non-existent amount of energetic memory of a substance in the homeopathic pill overcome the noise floor of all that other stuff, right? There's this huge, vast noise floor that would be monumental. I mean, it's like thunder versus not even a whisper.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that, of course, but I would imagine that one way, possibly, and I don't know that this is the answer to that, but one way would be that any of those other things, like if you take a homeopathic remedy for some, let's say you took other ones that other than the specific one that you needed for that would cause your specific symptoms. If you took any of the other ones, they wouldn't harm you, but they also wouldn't do anything for you. On the other hand, I don't know that in that morass of everything that's swimming around you is necessarily the one element or the several elements as combined that would be necessary. That's the only thing I could think that would explain that.
Actually, I can easily think of another thing that would explain.
Okay.
So the humans, when they think about things, they do so in a very stupid array of ways. And by the way, hi Risa, nice to see you. Yeah, they do so in a very stupid array of ways. And one of the stupid things they do, and I'm not trying to be mean by the use of this word, but the stupidity itself is actually quite cruel to us, is they think as if the power is in the substance. The substance has a mechanical power to cause effects in the humans. Right? That's how they think. That's how allopathic medicine works. Right? We depend on a mechanical effect in the body of a substance. But the weird problem with that is the idea that humans are separate from nature. Is someone filing their nails?
Sounds like it.
It does. Yeah, so all of our modern knowledge ways, possibly including homeopathy, suppose that humans are separate from nature and they're using little machines from nature to come into the human thing and change things around.
Mm-hmm.
So that can't be true. Let's just be absolutely clear. There's no separation between humans and nature. There's more separation between a droplet of the ocean flying up in the air and the ocean itself. There's more separation there than there is between humans and nature. Humans are nature, whatever nature may be, right? But the humans don't think that way, and they like to think mechanically, like we're a separate thing over here, and then there's all that other stuff called nature, right? Including homeopathy, right? Any other thing. Yeah. So the easy solution I can see is that the conspiracy between the patient, the homeopathic practitioner, the water, the substance, the history of the homeopathic idea, all those things combine to produce an actual effect. That I could understand, right? Which you don't have that conspiracy.
Well, you're saying it's basically a placebo effect, is what you're saying, I think.
Yeah, I'm not actually quite saying that. I'm saying something weirder. If we allow that a placebo is equivalent to the things I said previously, that the effect is caused by the kind of thing, the conspiracy and all that I said previously, then yeah, I'm saying the placebo effect. But I mean, there's this peculiar document on Medium. It's called Notes from Beyond. And it describes the history of a set of messages I've been receiving now for some months. After having received a decryption key, And in those messages, and there's a vast number of them, there's a video on the placebo effect that's quite staggering. It's probably not exactly the same as like, it's not so shocking as like someone had their leg cut off and then they met a healer and the healer said 3 words to them and they grew a new leg, right? But it's pretty close. Um, there are instances of sudden, inexplicable healing in humans that are really profound, and excusing them as the quote placebo effect is a dumb idea because what do we know about harm and healing, right? Well, we know maybe, 0.07% of what there is to know, yet many humans and human cultures and stuff go around acting as if they're authoritative. We know what's going on. We do this all the time. Um,
Well, let me ask you something. I mean, first of all, just to clarify, by placebo effect, I certainly think that you were saying, just to see if this is what you mean,
mm,
in terms of what the way you were looking at it. I mean, I think of it in terms of the fact that the mind is ours, it's part of everything and it has extreme powers. And also the kind of thing where if you're, the way the mind works, you can also create disease within yourself. If you feel certain ways, about things, you can, and there's all kinds of correlation between emotion and feeling and, and the kinds of things that that you do within your own body. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of those elements to it. Um, just to say that. So that's what I think of in terms of placebo. It encompasses all of that. But I have a question. I mean, you say we're not apart from nature, which I agree with completely 100%. We are nature. But we eat, things which are technically quote unquote outside of ourselves to eat. And what we eat very well determines our state of health. So I don't think, I mean, and there's certainly been herbology. I'm going to say this really quick because I don't want to monopolize anything, but, herbology has been around for a really long time. And by observation, that it has discovered certain substances, and medicine is kind of taken off of that and its various roots. And my particular physician who I agree with is that, it's in the background. Modern medicine is basically poisons that have some positive benefits. And I kind of agree that a lot of that is the case. I mean, when they create a modern medicine from an herbal remedy, or a plant, they only take certain elements, not the whole plant. And very often it's actually the whole plant that has the medicinal quote unquote value that causes healing. So I just wanted to say that in general.
hmm. So a few things come to mind. First is that herbalism was not discovered by observation. In most cases, the herbalistic knowledge that comes down to us moderns was discovered in trance, in visions, in conversations between the spirits of plants and animals and humans. I've heard this noise before, and I'm not trying to be critical of you, Nancy, but I heard a similar noise from a guy who went down to South America and founded a company called Shaman Pharmaceuticals because they had discovered that the shamans down there in one of the indigenous cultures that uses a psychedelic snort, a psychedelic snuff. One of those cultures had discovered remedies for thousands of diseases, and so this guy went down there, and their goal was to kind of rescue that culture by um, opportunistically capitalizing on the knowledge of these shamans. And he talked about similarity and how, for example, something that looks like a heart could be good for your heart and things like this. But I asked him very pointedly in the lecture, this is about 24 years ago now, happened at Golden Gate Park's little lecture hall. Anyway, I can probably find the guy's name. It wasn't the Yanomami he was looking at. let me see here. But I asked him, and I knew how they, I knew the answer to my question before I asked it. So I asked him, how did they discover which plants or concoctions were good for which diseases? And he got a funny look on his face. He looked around the room and he said, trial and error. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me right now? There's like
Well,
4 billion plants down there. They live in the Amazon rainforest.
no, that makes sense. That makes sense. As a matter of fact, they had this thing on, I don't know if you saw it, that I think it was a monkey, an ape, or whatever it was, self-medicating
Mm-hmm.
with some kind of a plant. Did you see that recently?
I heard about it.
Yeah. And it was, well, you could look it up if you want, but it's it was really clear that they knew.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing, no,
Right.
quote unquote,
The problem,
knowing
yeah.
is really the way we know anything. Matter of fact, direct I don't want to, I just thought of this the other day, that I don't want to let what I think I know interfere with my knowing, because it's the knowing that is the direct. And I agree with that. I mean, I think that that is how things, are known. But once we divide it into, but those plants, however we know this, and we do know it. And I agree with you. I mean, that makes far more sense than the idea of trial and error. You know, however we know it, that knowledge, you know, is effective knowledge, and it is something, quote unquote, from outside of us that goes inside of us, but so does food, you know.
There's a bunch of presumptions there that I don't trust. I hear what you're saying, and you're using ordinary language, and I acknowledge that. And I'm not trying to, again, I'm not trying to be a curmudgeon. But I want to distinguish between knowledge sub asterisk and knowledge sub A and knowledge sub B. So knowledge sub B is what common humans think and say and that kind of shit. Knowledge sub A is what skillful humans are capable of thinking and imagining and doing. And knowledge sub asterisk, that's the shit you're talking about that the monkey's using, right? That's not regular knowledge. So this is what I mean by defining our terms carefully, right? And ordinarily, we need at least a 3-layer description to have any chance of being intelligent together. Notice how rarely humans, how rarely they play this way, right? They almost never do what I just did with the word knowledge. I mean, have you even heard one other person do it anytime in the past 10 years, one time? They just think that a single word means a thing. This means one thing, dang it. Hand me a beer, Johnny. Let's go fix some truck parts.
I think Plato and the cave addressed it,
Yeah, okay, great. So someone did it, 1800 years ago one time? Amazing. Thank God. But yeah, so you see what I'm saying? Like, if we're going to talk intelligently, we need to use language much more carefully than what we're used to hearing, reading, seeing, or relating with. And it's easy to do. We just have to have the agreement that we're going to do that together. And then we have to be careful about understanding the different meanings of terms. So I want to circle back to a couple of topics here. I think it's important to highlight the conspiracy that occurs, potentially at least, between the patient, the homeopath, the water, the substance, and the tradition. Let's call that conspiracy. Let's call that conspiracy homeopathy, not the medicine. Let's not call the medicine homeopathy, right? The medicine is one of the elements in that conspiracy. And I think that conspiracy is very important. And, there's a positive gloss on the word conspiracy, right? And I think we're seeing it here. Now, it's also entirely clear to me that many humans have straight up died from believing that homeopathic medicine could save them. Straight up died, right? Those people died. They're like, this homeopathic medicine, it's gonna be amazing. It'll cure me. I can avoid them bad allopaths and surgery and all
You
those
can say
bad.
that about all medicine.
No, it's true, but I'm just trying to say that
yeah.
if homeopathy has ever cured a very serious metabolic or physical disease, I've never heard of that. I'd be very surprised to hear that. However, when a disease is remediated, I would love to see the proof that it was remediated by a medicine or a treatment. Because
I
when
think
something
by
go ahead.
determinate harm, which is basically harm caused by doctors, hospitals, and the medical system itself, in many estimates, is the third or even second leading cause of death in North America. I think right
Uh-huh.
I think you're
after
right. You're
cancer
absolutely
and
right.
heart disease. So
Yeah, the problem is it's really difficult to determine I'm just looking this up. So I've certainly experienced some iatrogenic harm. I think most of us who've been exposed to doctors have. Whether it was serious or not is more more complex. I don't see. It is considered a leading cause of death, but it doesn't. It's hard to find its rank. Um, the problem with okay, so we have a bunch of problems here, but the main one that concerns me is the problem with what I call one thing mind, right? We've got one thing. We think one thing one way. We think one way about one thing. And so we think, for example, that if a human gets better, it's because of the mechanical effect of the specific treatments they received from the allopath, in allopathic treatments. And that can't be true. There's no chance of that being true. And what I mean by true isn't perfectly authoritatively correct. What I mean by true is has the likelihood of being relatively truthful, right? There's no chance because there are literally infinite factors involved in every injury or disease and to every moment of healing. Infinite. Every time. In fact, there's nothing you can point to in your mind or in language that doesn't have infinite qualities. What we do is we collapse a manifold of infinities down to some derivatives. This is called excerption in consciousness. Then we use words to refer to the excerptions we do not acknowledge having done and pretend that we've just described how the universe works.
You just wrote about that. You want to do
Yeah,
basically.
I did, actually. After reading some a book examining Owen Barfield's Saving the Appearances. But yeah, this is a huge problem. And the funny thing is, I'm doing it right now. In order to say the things I'm saying, I'm taking a variety of manifolds of infinities. I'm making specific purposeful excerptions, and I'm presenting to you the results as if they might be authoritative. Right? So, in fact, I'm going to argue there isn't too much else you can do if you're making, if you're making speech. There's other things you can do like kissing or taking a poop, or pulling weeds or something that aren't exactly the same. But what you'll discover if you even look at those things is that they are also collapsings of manifolds that result in derivative excerptions.
How would you differentiate that from just generally the word for uh, generalization?
Wait, how would I differentiate it generally from the word generalization? That's a great question. I really like that one.
I mean, how would you excerpt it?
Right.
Do an excerption from the. I mean, everything. I mean, I know what you're saying is true. I mean, but that's the whole. I don't know, that's weird, getting a weird feedback.
You getting
But,
feedback?
yeah, are you?
No. Anyone else hearing that?
Oh.
Yeah, I heard some feedback. I think Nancy's voice was echoing back through Darren's mic.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah. Hopefully this will
um,
help.
so I mean, I think it really comes back. Yeah.
It managed.
I think we just lost Nancy there.
There we go.
I know it says I'm a moderator.
Really?
What happened?
That's great. I love it.
Is anybody here?
Yeah.
Oh, she's gone again. I'm holding on to my thoughts because I do have some that I think are relevant, but I want to wait for Nancy to come back. Welcome back.
Thank you. But yeah, I was just I'm hearing feedback myself.
You still hearing it?
Yeah, I am. I'm hearing my own voice. Okay. Well, I won't say much.
Okay, let's do an experiment. Let's do an experiment. I'm gonna mute my mic, and then you talk and
Alright.
see if you hear the feedback.
That makes sense. Not hearing the feedback now, so maybe that's what it was. But at any rate, just quickly to say, I think it again, we come back down to the same thing. In essence, it's all one. We're just trying to name things when we break it up for our usefulness and for fun and appearance, to deal with physical reality. And this is the kind of thing that we have to be very careful of remembering that and remembering what we really are and who we really are, that we literally are all one, and this really is all one, and that what you're doing, what you're saying, what we're saying is basically to be very careful about how you say things so you don't forget. I think that that's something. It's
All right, I'm gonna respond now, and let me know if you start hearing feedback again, Nancy. I'm gonna try to mute my mic when you're speaking, because I'm recording.
I've muted mine. I've muted mine in the meantime.
Okay, great. All right, so first of all, language itself is a problem, but like technology, we're not going to get rid of it, so we need to use it more intelligently together. Yes, what I was saying about manifolds is a generalization, but unlike most generalizations, it's a hyper-generalization because it generalizes the fundamental thing that must be done and surfaces it in our consciousness, right? It generalizes and surfaces it in consciousness. A fundamental activity that we're not aware we are doing, which is the collapsing of manifolds of infinities in cognition to produce communications acts and writing and so forth and theories and models and all these things, right? So
all of it.
Everything. So it's very useful to be aware of this because what determines the outcome of excerptions, like the relationship between A and B, for example, if A is a leaf and B is a tree, what determines that relationship and its characteristics is not logic. It's the purpose for which we started making those excerptions. It's the purpose that we had prior to emitting speech. And if we become aware of this and pay close attention to it together, we are capable of acts of intelligence that are far beyond what ordinary people ever get anywhere near. So it's not just that it's a generalization. It's not trivial. It's not a trivial generalization. It's a monumental generalization. It's a hypergeneralization because really you can't even generalize if you're not doing the thing I said about the collapsing of the manifolds and excerptions. So the collapsing of the manifolds and excerptions is not actually a generalization. It's a meta-generalization or something like that. Now, I want to go back briefly before I lose the topic and talk about this weird stuff with Masaru Emoto. And one of the mistakes Emoto made, I think, is to suppose that his research told us what was going on, quote, with water, unquote. And once again, we have this problem where the humans are thinking of themselves as separate. I'm not having any effect on this, right? The water has this property by itself of this kind of memory. So that if I speak to it of love, it forms a certain kind of ice crystal. And if I speak to it of hate, it forms a different kind of ice crystal, and so forth. Now, all that's very interesting. There were problems reproducing Emoto's work, but it's not surprising if we understand the outcome of his research as having been a conspiracy between Emoto's felt sense and ideas about water, and water itself, and the specific circumstances under which his research produced results.
That
Hey,
makes
Mick.
perfect sense.
Nice to see you, Mick.
Nice to meet you.
Nancy's here, Naoko's here, Beast, Rises here, or
I'm
Risa.
really interested in the effects that consciousness can and does have on what we call matter and energy. Like, for example, with the so-called placebo and nocebo effects, you can have a person who basically eats enormous amounts of junk food versus someone who eats extremely healthy. But in some cases, the former's consciousness and the latter's consciousness will project onto the body and relate to the body in a way where the person eating the terrible diet will be measurably healthier over long amounts of time compared to the one eating the super healthy diet, etc. Or like when it comes to medicine, you can have remarkably similar circumstances where two people will receive this, like the same treatment for basically the same disease. One will recover enormously and the other will deteriorate or die. And consciousness itself and the way it projects energy onto the body and through the body seems enormously impactful on not just health, but like, how would I put it? Many aspects of the way the body functions.
Absolutely.
And it's just curious to me how two seemingly similar or same circumstances can lead to drastically different outcomes, all things considered, that we can consider anyways.
What occurs to me is that that it really has to, I mean, the factors, if you want to look at it as factors, and I know you don't look at things mechanically in that way.
I do, of course I do.
No, I wasn't actually saying to you, but
Oh, Naoko.
but also to you, I guess. Basically, things aren't all quote unquote mechanical, or if they are mechanical, the mechanics are affected by so many things. That mechanics are just maybe you want to call it the structural element of something which basically created the structural element, or is a structural element that we're, either not aware of, or, I mean, there's so many factors in everything, infinite almost, in anything that happens, including diseases. I mean, we've built up a certain way that it's pretty assured that if you're going to eat, fried food 24/7, it's going to take a toll. I mean, your body wasn't meant for that. But of course, there's so many elements that are involved that you can't possibly address any but the very grossest of the aspects in any one way, I think.
It seems like consciousness is so, certain aspects and projections of consciousness are so closely correlated to the body, and actually in some ways the environment as well, that I have to wonder whether panpsychism, which is the idea that everything is made of consciousness, has some merit. Because, and this leads me to a whole other rabbit hole, but basically, I don't know enough, but there's basically materialism, which is the idea that everything is made of matter and energy, which is separate, accidental, random, and non-conscious, which I do not personally subscribe to. And then you have things like idealism or philosophical idealism, where
Live
basically the
streaming
universe
has started.
where the universe is contained within consciousness. And then panpsychism, which posits that actually everything is made out of certain expression or layers of consciousness. And then you have things like substance dualism, which is that you have two ontological primitives. One is consciousness or transpersonal consciousness, and then the other would be matter and energy, and they somehow intersect and intertwine. And I don't really know which one is true, if any, but the sheer interrelatedness and intertwining of consciousness, and at least the biological body, is very compelling to me.
So,
Oh,
oh, go ahead, Nick.
Darren, were you recording this?
Yes. Yes, I am.
Is the recording back on? Because it just said live streaming off.
I was not able to get the recording happening here, so I am recording it locally on my machine.
All right. Okay, I am Nyoko. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Everything you say is true and not true. And I come at it from a slightly different way, like going back to what you said about one guy eating McDonald's being healthy, one guy eating all the healthy food being not. Is that there's a consciousness, say if you call it the ether, which was the old name, right? AETHER. You can imagine that that's a kind of a shaping factor. And someone is called archetypes. Where the seed for an oak tree grows into an oak, it doesn't grow into a flower. So you can, because you're a conscious being with the ability to shape your surroundings. You can do it with your hands. You can, where you walk in the grass every day, you'll end up with a pathway compared to the grass around you, which will keep growing. So that ends up being like the pathway ends up being like a funnel which you fall into, right? So consciously you can create these funnels which you will be healthy no matter what type of shit you put into yourself. Whereas in the materialistic thinking, you are what you eat. Basically, people who think like that, they'll eat shit so they'll become shit. Oh, sorry for using the bad language, but you know what I mean. The archetypes we know exist because the seeds of the different plants grow into different types of things. They don't just grow into the Brazil nut doesn't grow into an oak tree. So that's kind of a consciousness, or let's call it the mapping of the ether. But us as humans have the ability we're one of the few creatures on Earth to be able to manipulate our surroundings. That includes manipulating the consciousness. I'm just throwing up ideas out here. Manipulating the conscious ether, which means that we can decide to be healthy. You know, we can our life force, we can use our life force to be healthy beings, even if we're forced to eat a load of crap.
Right. Yeah, consciousness seems to have quite a lot of potential and abilities that are not ordinarily assigned to it by, like, in general. Not just deliberately using the placebo and nocebo effect or things like that, or say projecting onto the body in a certain way to enable it to become healthy in shit situations, but like more extreme ones, like psychokinesis.
Yeah, like we just stick to material things or affect on material things, like your body. Like there's times of where you've tribes and warrior-like tribes, and the men will become very physically strong, and their muscles will become, you know, you will see high definition, even if they're not doing a lot of physical work, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will notice a high definition in them, right? But then there will be other times where the society becomes, you know, there's less risk. So the whatever, whether it's consciousness or hormonal effects, means that the people will become softer looking, right?
Well,
like the times now.
Well, let me just ask. I mean, I'm of the opinion that consciousness is a priori to matter. In other words, it isn't that matter develops into consciousness. It's that consciousness develops matter. And I, you know, and you've probably, I don't know, have you read Rupert Sheldrake at all in terms of his like morphogenic fields? And that kind of speaks to, I think, what you're talking about, that there is kind of a field, a consciousness field, and the consciousness field could be funnels for a particular group of people under certain circumstances, either kind of what you were talking about too. I don't know if that what you think about that, or if that makes sense what I'm saying, but I just think that makes sense from what you're saying, and I believe, you know, and that consciousness is actually a priori. So
To quickly interject, I think that one of the problems is that consciousness is so multi-layered and multifaceted that as a regular human born with amnesia, so kind of disconnected from infinity in many ways, that we generally are not aware of, are not surfacely aware of in our waking state, like 99.999% of consciousness. So we get this very, like, extremely narrow, kind of myopic experience of consciousness that only contains usually the five senses and thoughts and emotions and bodily sensations and things like that. But in my experience, there are more layers to consciousness than just the ordinary surface waking state and the dreaming state. And it just keeps going deeper and deeper. And accessing them is kind of difficult for an amnesic. Like, it can take years, if not decades, of practice to become thoroughly and specifically aware of the details of those other layers of consciousness. And
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. But I wouldn't denote a priori to any one over the other. Let's look at it like the yin and yang, right? And people forget between the yin and yang you have the chi, which is the potentiality. So you can imagine the yang being our material being, the yin being energy, and then the chi being consciousness. Like, all is one and one is all. It's like that Holy Trinity, you know. I don't know, did you ever hear about the Monroe Institute, was his name Robert Monroe?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's reportedly, whether it's true or not, been communicating with astral beings, right? But they were living in pure consciousness, but they were envious of us that we had physical bodies, and we didn't realize how lucky we wanted to be. And if you look at all the religions of the world at the moment, most of the majority of the major ones, the main outcome you want to reach is pure consciousness of being in heaven, enlightened heaven. So there's, I think it should be looked at, there's consciousness that come before matter. You can argue this and that, but the fact of the matter is, there is matter, there is energy, and we know there's a supernatural, between different experiences different people have had. So that's like the yin yang and the chi.
Yeah, I don't know which is true, if any, whether it's just all some form of consciousness, because there are different, like there's personal consciousness, subpersonal, transpersonal, things that are not even physically dependent. And substance dualism would posit that you have both ontological primitives, matter, energy, and consciousness. And really, I just don't know in my present state which is a priori, if any.
I'd like
About
to,
what you're yeah,
sorry.
okay.
So I want to introduce a few things. One, to circle back to the water thing briefly, very briefly. I posted a link in the chat to Veda Austin's Facebook page. Veda is a water memory researcher. She had a near-death experience and has developed a method of flash freezing water after exposing it to some physical object. And the results she obtains, to call them shocking, would be the wildest of understatements. It makes what Emoto was doing look like, I don't know, playing with silly putty or something. So, for example, there was a photograph by someone she trained yesterday who simply exposed a petri dish of water to her fingertip and then flash by holding her fingertip above the petri dish, okay? And then flash froze the water, and it's blatant. It might as well have been a photograph in ice crystals. You see the exact structure of the fingertip in the frozen ice crystals of the water after the fingertip being held above it for a few seconds. And a billion other, many thousands of other examples of this. So I just want to point that out to everybody because Veda's work is really trippy. I'm going to try to get an interview with her. I don't know if I'm going to manage it yet, but I'm working on it. So as far as that goes, I find that quite fascinating. I don't think Veda is making things up. I don't think she's phony, quote unquote. By the way, that word comes from the difference between the sound of an actual human voice and the sound of a human voice heard over one of the initial telephones. That's where we got that word phony from. So I'll drop that topic there and return to where we are now, which is the relationship between what we've been calling consciousness and matter and beings and so forth. I think it might be wise for us to perhaps select a different word than consciousness. We might even have to make up a word. And what I want to indicate by that word is the more than merely living intelligences, the origin of the possibility of minds and awareness. Because consciousness as a word can be easily misunderstood as a sort of mechanical level thing, like you have something like awareness at the top, or maybe, a word that we need to make up, which is what I'm arguing. We have something at the top, then you have awareness, and you have consciousness, and you have cognition, which is thinking. But there's something truly amazing that I noticed while Mick was speaking, and thank you so much, Mick, for showing up today and hanging out with us. Really appreciate you, man. Which is that when he started to say the thing about physical stuff and your muscles and things, and them responding to your intention or your desire or your imagination, there's something actually much weirder going on that's blatantly obvious. Right. I am reaching out at this moment to pick up a glass of water and I'm drinking it. Okay, so that action tells us directly that awareness, the human body is like a platform through which awareness can organize physical matter. I just did it. In the simplest physical action between my hands and some objects, I am reorganizing matter with awareness. So if anyone objects and says, oh, that's some metaphysical, blah, 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 the fact that they can even move their vocal cords to object is an example of exactly what I'm talking about. So I would like us to have some other word for the stuff, some other word than consciousness, because that can be misunderstood. And what I want to mean by this word, we could, maybe certain philosophers called it stuff like things in themselves or that which is. But that's not descriptive enough, because what I mean is a more than merely living superposition over the possibilities of awareness, consciousness, intelligence, cognition. I mean a primordial feature of all that exists and much that doesn't exist physically, which is informing. It goes into things and from within informs them. And we may come up with a word, or I might suggest one in a minute, but before I do that, there's also a secondary problem, which is that humans think I'm acting from inside me to outside things. And what I'd like to suggest is that the idea of outsideness is delusional. There is no outsideness. Outsideness is an artifact of the perspective from which we are participating and thinking about these matters. There is no outsideness. Earlier Nancy was saying everything is one. Yes, everything is one, but everything is also distinct, and 19 other things that it is impossible to formulate in English. Right? So, everything is one, and there are distinguished, quote unquote, separate beings, and 19 other things that we haven't figured out how to surface in consciousness or describe to ourselves yet. So, for the moment, we can call this thing from which awareness and consciousness and intelligence and cognition derives or localizes, we can call that thing X, but I want us to make up a word for it. And any suggestions would be welcome.
I realize consciousness can be a very vague term and can mean many different things to many different people, but I kind of like the term as well.
That's quite a term. What was that?
Oh, incoming call, apparently.
Oh, okay. But what was the term that you said you liked? It got obscured by that, whatever that was.
I like the term consciousness as well. It's just that it can be and is misinterpreted or tends to mean different things to different people. But
Well, let me just throw this into the fray. I mean, consciousness of what? And what is conscious? In other words, I mean, I think that a lot of religions and throughout times, I mean, eye of God, Ra, is it consciousness being conscious of itself? that causes the split, that causes all the many other things. I don't know if anybody who doesn't feel this way, but I know what you were mentioning, what Organa, what George was mentioning is basically that that it's both, and it is both. But it's the one, and it's everything else that's forming, information, pre-formation. But I think the whole consciousness thing, and I'm not sure about how to describe it either, has a lot to do with, I mean, you can use the word awareness, but that's not really enough. I mean, the consciousness, when I said that consciousness was a priori to matter, what I was saying was that it is that which is all perhaps aware. And where that awareness goes, maybe goes into the many, many things and many people and many everything that exists.
What I mean by it is like subjectivity, direct subjective experience, what it is like to be so and so, or how would I put it? That which experiences, maybe.
So that which is aware that it's aware on some level. Is that not what that which experiences is? Or is it the direct experience without the subjective, without the self-awareness?
I think it can exist in many states, with or without a self, even with or without awareness, because there can be existence and things happening and a total lack of awareness of it. And then later on, in a different state of consciousness, you realize that all of that was going on, but there was no personal awareness of it at the time. So
that makes sense. That's your personal consciousness that you're talking about. But I guess what I'm talking about is, I think there's, like we're talking about, I think everybody is, that there is consciousness. You were talking about earlier how it was, how the personal and different levels of consciousness, but I think that the consciousness that is transpersonal, or there is your own I mean, I think we're all, personally, I think we're all God, period. And that we are all this larger consciousness, kind of dumbed down, if you want to put it that way, forgetting, if you want to put it that way, that's what we are, or whatever. And we're having this experience, clearly, or we wouldn't be on this phone call together. But I mean, there is something else which exists. I think when I say consciousness is a priori, I'm talking about the consciousness that we are all part of. That's basically what I meant by it. Not personal consciousness.
definitely there's something like a collective consciousness that is not ultimately separated at root layers, although it contains multiplicity. So, as Darren said, it's both one and the many at the same time. But yeah, I used to believe many things. And now I'm not so sure about many of them.
Yeah. Just to retort on one of the things there, if we were God, we would be able to describe what it is. So I don't think we are the whole. Like, it's like maybe we're like a leaf on the tree. That leaf claiming to be the tree, is a bit superfluous, because he'll fall off in the autumn just like we die and wither. No, that's nature.
Is it possible that the tree is claiming to be the leaf?
No. I think
I've never seen a tree make a claim.
Yeah, but like this thing to say that we are God, we're part of it, but we're not the greater consciousness. To me, we're more like the leaf on the tree. We're part of it. There is a greater.
I think you're right, but if you look at the whole fractal pattern that exists, that exists, the Mandelbrot and everything that is, as above, so below, how does that work? How is it that as above, so below? I mean, it's not to say that I am a God, or the God that controls everything, but I think that I don't know what God is if God is not part of everything, and we are not part of God. So
Yeah, but
Okay, there's a huge problem here with parts and wholes. And whether or not we are God is a similar question, and I can show you directly how shockingly similar this question is to whether or not my hand is me. Because certainly my hand isn't all of me, and yet without my hand, I'm not me. It's very complicated. This is a problem in thought and in language and in concept. And the problem is, what is the difference between A and B? And as I said yesterday, the difference will not be found, it will not be discovered or articulated in a simple fashion, because what determines the difference is not predetermined as we imagine in language. The difference is produced by our relationship with categories and identities in thought, conception, and language. The difference is not in the things. The difference is in our mind. And the difference is produced by the purpose for which we make excerptions, producing thereby seemingly discrete entities, which we then refer to and compare and evaluate and analyze.
yeah, I would just take a step back to what you said with that hand in the body or the hand in you. If you lost your hand, you would still live on. But if the hand lost you, then the hand is finished. So there are differences between the parts and the whole.
Yes, I mean, that's a very insightful figure that you produced there, Mick. However, the figure is not as authoritative as it appears. It's crafty. Your figure is crafty. And I acknowledge and appreciate that craftiness. And yet, what it really comes down to is what we mean by hand and Darren. It's not that. So we've often heard people say that, like, if I lose one of my limbs, I'm still me. And like you said, Mick, which I've never heard anyone say, if my limb loses me, it's done for. Which is a really interesting twist on that. But it's very complicated. It's not simply true. Because, for example, when a feature of a unity, quote, goes away, unquote, right? And by the way, it's mono, M-A-N-O, mono, e-mono, which I think means hand in hand. When a feature of a unity goes away from one thing, let's say a not real person, a person named Amigdala, loses their hand. And we'll pretend that they are like a real person, even though they're imaginary. I'm doing this figure on purpose. When that person loses their hand, it seems to have become separated from their body. That which disappears in one place appears again somewhere else. It seems to me. There's like this weird thing which isn't exactly one of the laws of thermodynamics, but it's something like elements of a form cannot actually fully go away. They may disappear from one place or time, but they are nonetheless present in others, or even that which departs from one observed context appears in some other context, observed or not. Thoughts?
that's archetype that Mick was talking about earlier. I think. Yes, of course, the hand is a morphology, and a chair is a chair is a chair, even if it's a different form. But I think I don't know that that's actually, I don't know. I guess maybe I don't know how you mean that if you don't think of it the way I'm mentioning it.
It is kind of interesting to do a thought experiment that goes something like, what makes me me? Or what does the intactness of self consist of? Like, am I the body in entirety? Am I the brain? Am I an eye? If you take, like, am I DNA, a cell, the consciousness witnessing it? If you come at it from an analytical perspective and take it all apart, you can't really distinguish any one such part of self and say, this specifically is what I am or who I am. It seems to all be like a synergistic, interconnected whole of, well, at least on the cellular level, I think, sentient beings. And yeah, when a part of us, like a hand or an eye or a limb, is suddenly severed or taken away, the person, the being, is still there, but in an altered form.
Well, I mean,
Don't know if that
I mean,
makes sense.
well, I mean, what I know in terms of, like, for example, there's a quote from the Bible which goes, if your left arm offends thee, cut it off. Well, what that means is that there are lesser parts of you and there are non-lesser parts. And you can still, it's like the Monty Python thing where whatever that was, one where the guy keeps getting his arms and legs cut off and he says, come on, I'll fight you, I'll fight you. Well, it's the will, I would say, of that person that still exists. I mean, look at, and anybody but without their physical parts, or they're still really just as much them. It's their consciousness, if you will, or their will and their connection to the larger awareness, hopefully, that determines who and what you are and how you remember who you are. But I mean, I just think that, of course, we're in a physiological form that's functional, as are all the other animals, for existence on the planet. But I don't know that I personally would spend too much time wondering if a hand was missing if you're still you. To me, it's kind of an obvious thing you are.
Although I would not necessarily consider the parts of myself lesser or greater. Like, it's a perspectival thing.
Okay.
But I want to come back to what Darren just said about if one thing disappears in one context, it reappears in another. What do you mean by that exactly? I guess he's absent or muted.
I'm sorry, what was the question? I was away from the keyboard for a moment.
Oh, no worries. I wanted to ask you about what you just said regarding if one thing disappears in one context, it reappears in another.
Right, so consider the fact of drinking water. I just took a sip from the glass of water on my desk. This is all a construct in language. What is actually going on has nothing to do with what I just said. Nonetheless, the water disappears from the glass and appears somewhere unobserved inside me. That's what I'm talking about, right? Fundamental, we don't have to take wild metaphysical leaps into the stratosphere to understand the principles that underlie our experience and our beingness, right? So, like, is it possible to? Let me just ask you this question: is there anything I can do to the water in the glass that causes it to actually go away? If it were to
You could
go away,
probably-
go ahead.
Oh, I was saying, hypothetically, you could invent a technology that I'm getting a lot of feedback. That based
chemical
Hold on.
introduced. Yeah. Sorry.
Naoko, hypothetically, you could invent a technology that what? I got kicked out.
that completely neutralizes all of the energy that the water consists of, and so would effectively remove its form from the universe.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, you could say in a thought experiment, but I'm asking for something I can do to the water to literally make it go gone, like not be. And there isn't anything like that. I don't think it's possible to make the water be gone. And if it were gone, where would it be gone to? Go ahead, Mick.
I think it actually what you said previously is a very interesting point about, like, with the water, there's memory in water. They see through homeopathy. You put on the link to the woman earlier, Veda Austin, right? So we say when we're talking about your body, this brings us back to consciousness. Say when you with a certain vibrational frequency as you live now, right? And you attain a certain vibrational frequency in your life, a life force. And then when you die, does that and you decompose, does that life force go with the different molecules of water that were in your body into the ground, and it can be reborn and back, so it's kept in consciousness, because that's the term we're using. Basically, it lasts into the future generations and is born again.
I don't know, honestly. There seems to be at least some evidence for reincarnation actually happening, although I don't know.
I didn't want to talk about reincarnation. I was talking about just because what we were talking about earlier about consciousness, matter, energy, which was a priori. Like that, your conscious free life force, which you have during life, is that disseminated through the molecules that break down when you die, and it's retained in them. So it's not just pure matter of water. The water is retaining your consciousness and can flow down a river, or it can be within another being like a fish. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, what about now? I mean, if you, first of all, this matter energy thing is kind of a false thing, because we all know scientifically even that matter is just a concentrated form of energy. So it's not like there's one, it really isn't like they're dualistic. It's just we think of matter as things you could see, physical things, but really, I mean, we know just from, Einstein and the bomb, that matter contains tremendous amount of concentrated energy. In fact, that's what it is. But apart from that, I mean, I think, that what we are, I mean, if you love somebody, right, and you send that love to them and you feel that love with them, that is energetic, right? And that exists. And personally, I think we're energy riding around in meat suits, and consciousness riding around in meat suits, and we've formed into this physical reality that's come from whatever. But the bottom line is, I mean, I would say, of course, the energy of you still exists. I don't think it could be destroyed, and I don't think anything could be destroyed in that sense. I mean, I just think I don't personally think that at all. So
Although I am very averse to the idea of calling the body a meat suit, as it kind of disembeings it.
no,
I
it's
think
brilliant. It's brilliant. I don't mean to
mis-
denigrate the body at all. Just want to say I say it deliberately that way just to distinguish, to just so that that shock actually even exists out there for people to think, is this, is this body all I am? Of course not. So, I mean, the reason I say it is kind of for its shock value. Of course, I'm not denigrating it in any way or thinking it's separate in any way from our purpose or our function or who we are incarnate at all. Just FYI.
I think the body gets misperceived and misinterpreted like all the time by regular amnesic humans like me. It seems to be a collective of sentient beings, trillions of them, or quadrillions if you count the bacteria. And from one perspective, anyways, and somehow perceiving and relating to the body as if it were just a separate, non-conscious piece of meat causes the body to reflect that. And so it has a degrading effect, I find. Not that that's what you were saying, but just in terms of the terminology itself.
Well, the reason I also use meat suit is incarnate is a word. And what incarnate means is in meat, right? That's the incarnate is that. And of course, the body has all the brilliance of all the beings that exist in it and everything. It's just because when people think, and I don't accuse you of this or believe you believe this or anybody at this call believes this, but if people get lost in the physicality of things to the point where they don't realize it, it's kind of almost a wake-up call to say, no, it's not just even the organizing principle of this amazing morphic physicality that exists in humans and every other animal, every other being, every other piece of every other being. It's not just that. It's what's in that. It's the reason for it being in the first place. So that's the reason why I do it. It's like I say, it's a little bit of shock value, but it's actually within the idea of the terminology incarnate.
I think we've gotten a little bit distracted here. So back to Mick's question about whether the molecules in the substances, presuming that molecules are, actually there, which is not entirely clear, in our bodies when we die, go to other places. They certainly do. If, in as much as we have a model of what happens to molecules and their transformations. What that means is hard to understand. And that model actually is really helpful if we're looking at a single molecule or we're trying to build a molecule, say a protein or something like this. But it gets pretty weird if we start including many molecules. Now it becomes really difficult to tell what's going on over time. And weirdly, one of the bizarre things about science is that it seems to be many branches of it are very concerned with prediction. And this comes down to something that's fundamentally human, which is a problem that we all face. We're facing it right now, even as we participate in this meeting. And the problem orbits three pivots that I will call vigilance, ambiguity, and prediction. And ambiguity, vigilance, and prediction are tightly linked, right? Because when there's ambiguity, our vigilance will tend to rise because our threat sentinel will wake up. And the reason the threat sentinel is waking up is because it's trying to figure out what's going to happen in the future. A lot of science is oriented toward this task of making predictions, and thus determining whether a model of a physical system or a relational system or a biological system or even a psychological system in the case of psychology, which is not really a true science. We're trying to understand what the relationship between the model and the thing that's being modeled, and also we're trying to understand how past situations produce present situations and lead to future situations, and we're trying to be able to make predictions. Certainly the molecules in the body are quote unquote recycled by quote unquote nature, none of us having any fucking idea what nature is. We know what we mean, I think. We know in a trivial or clumsy way what we mean when we use the word. But we mean all that is. However, I would usually distinguish between things that I see as natural, which are things that were not produced by human beings having become catastrophically addicted to the engineering and production of machines. To me, machines don't look like part of nature. I can understand someone who says, no, everything that is nature, so machines are included. I get it. I get the argument. But I think it's important to make a distinction between something that offloads entropy into living systems and something that's relatively negentropic, which the biosphere is. In any case, so I realize I've, made a very birdwalky movement here. Yes, the molecules are recycled. Do they carry the energy of our soul with them? Who knows? It seems, if just thinking casually about it, it seems that those molecules may, in a way not entirely dissimilar to how homeopathy likes to frame things, have some kind of energetic fingerprint of us. But I don't think necessarily that, I tend to suspect and think as if there's something like a soul. But what I think it is really weird. It's not a single thing. It's like a constellation of relationships among beings over time with a central feature that I think of as Darren. Right? So instead of just thinking Darren has a soul, I don't think that way at all. I think it's a constellation effect. It's much like a solar system having a star in it, right? There's this constellation of beings and relationships and moments and places and memories and futures that is moment by moment flowing into and being localized as Darren. And it doesn't mean I can't have a past life or a future life. It just means that it won't be, it's not like a single diamond inside Darren that goes outside Darren when I die and then goes boop into another body later and gets reincarnated. I think that's wildly unlikely. I'd also like to suggest that all past lives are uniquely yours, and so are all future lives. In the sense that all of them are you, but their relationship to the you in this moment that is presently localizing as, say, Mick or Naoko or Beast or Risa or Nancy, what's localizing is a unique near neighbor array of relationships between all those beings. And so every past life is mine, every future life is mine, but every future and past life is also yours, and they are differently mine and yours. Something like this seems to be a bit more, a slightly more intelligent way to encompass the question. We have a huge problem in English with the idea of singular possession. And like, I have my soul has a body called, there's this one, and my soul is inside this body. Okay. No, because none of those things are, none of them are explicitly separate. All of them are processes. Something is flowing into me right now, allowing me to be alive and speak. And we presume that it's my heartbeat that keeps me alive, but it's not. It's something flowing into me. And I think it's that thing, that X, that is primordial to awareness, consciousness, intelligence, cognition, sensing, relation, experience. It's that X that is flowing into me, and it's uniquely flowing into me, and it's uniquely flowing into you, but it is uniquely flowing into us from something that we can think of as singular, which is often referred to as God or the one sun that is the inner light of all events and situations. Thoughts?
I partially agree with you. I didn't mean that you know, our soul is going into the molecule of water and being reincarnated if that piece of that water goes into someone else in the future. It was more like, and I'm going to use the term information energy. So apparently our existence is to learn for the universe, to experience and to learn, right? So we're obviously building up new experiences for ourselves, for the relations that you mentioned there, Darren, and the universal consciousness, right? So, or God, whatever you want to call it. So that information energy is accumulated over time, and according to some theories, the universe is fractal, so that can be held within me as Mick or a molecule of water within Mick. So I wouldn't, it's just part of the learning and experience through life that also will be a relation to the, you know, the development of the soul in the individual. But that information energy is, you know, I'm just positing here that it could be retained in each molecule of water that goes through you. And, you know, it forms part of the locale that can inform other things around you, right? Like for example, if I take a piss outside under a tree, right, and then there's mycelium around that tree, and that tree puts up some mushrooms, right? You know, it could be that the mushrooms, if I eat them later, say if they're a certain type of one, say like amanita or another one that everyone knows about, that there could be a bit of a feedback from the information energy that they saw coming from me, went through the tree roots, through the mycelium, back up to the mushroom, and they're telling me something back.
Yes.
Do I know?
So, Mick, what was your original question actually concerning itself with about the dying into molecules and them going into other things? What was your concern there? What was interesting you about that?
Well, it was about you were saying about the hand being separate from the body, but it comes back to the original thing about which was a priori consciousness, matter, energy, you know, like because we were discussing about the greater consciousness.
I still don't see what you were exploring with the question, but that's okay. We can continue on.
Can I just ask if Mick, if what you were saying had to do with the fact that you were wondering if everything that's physical that we're made of, and everything that whatever we experience, whatever we have informs all of it on some level. I don't know if that's what you were saying, but that's kind of what I was getting from what you were saying.
I was extending Darren's point about, you know, the hand being a representation of you yourself, or not a representation, you know, a piece, but also of you, you know, that we were discussing about the part being the whole and the whole being the part.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the weird thing though is that, as you can see, my hand is not actually a part. There are no parts to living beings. The concept of parts is a um it's a surgical and a dissectionist perspective. There are no parts. I'd love to see you get one of your molecules separate from your body. I can't wait.
Yeah, Darren, let's go back to the water. The water, you drink a bit of the water is outside you. You drink a bit, it's in you, then you take a piss 24 to 48 hours later, back outside you again. So there are exchanges of molecules, of things, stuff from your body to and from you.
Yes, if there are separate things, we can imagine that. Yes. And if there aren't separate things, we can still imagine something similar. We can imagine unities in discrete processes and situations interacting together.
The weird thing is, as humans, I can't speak for anyone else, but as a human, I cannot, or at least I do not, perceive the entirety of the universe in my experience as like one unity. So the mind seems conditioned to separate certain things and categorize them and label them and assess them as separate, even though ultimately I think this universe is probably much more of a unity. Like when I look at the environment right now, the desk, the glasses on it, the clouds outside, the birds, the trees, it is somehow foreign to me to perceive everything as a whole and everything in relation to everything else. And it's quite trippy to like try and delve into that kind of perception.
Is it possible that I'm thinking in terms of meditation and the times that maybe without thinking about it, you just felt a sense of oneness? I don't know. I don't think you can think yourself into an awareness of oneness. I don't think that's possible. I don't think all the thinking part is the part that we do to divide things up and do what Darren was talking about with the vigilance, the ambiguity, prediction, and all that, which is the other side of the coin, which creates the many things we out of the one, so to speak, where we're doing all this stuff to keep ourselves functional. And of course we can get lost in that. That's a whole, I mean, to the degree that we forget what we're even here for. And I really think that a question that kind of was alluded to, but that wasn't, that never really kind of gets out there exactly, is what is the purpose behind us being here? And I know, that Nick was talking about, the purposes, and I think this is true. I personally, like I said, we broke up. I think we just broke up because we were bored and we were looking at each other from different eyes, so that so that we have an experience and we build on that. And I think it's we've created heaven out of hell, made this thing hell instead of fun, because we've gotten so lost in the having and the doing in order to be, that we're excessive in it, and we've forgotten the whole experience of the being. And I don't think, so that's my take on it.
Whatever might be the purpose or the cause of this, I definitely don't see it as ethical, because we have horrors like factory farming and commercial fishing and wage slavery and ecocide and abuse and poverty and famine and disease and enormous, just sheer unimaginable amounts of suffering going on. Probably not just on this planet, but others. And just, it's whatever the cause or reason is, it is definitely not ethical or anyone else.
I mean, let me just ask, I mean, something, and I'll stop talking, but, we just talked all that you say that is wrong I mean, and I think this is what, I mean, religions have certainly looked at this. I mean, everything looks at this, philosophers, religions, they all really come back down to it. But, you know, if we are out of touch with our experience as beings, and it is pain. I mean, Buddhism talks about, you know, suffering, and that is the nature of life, and that is painfully, we call it ethical. I mean, we don't need to exacerbate the suffering once we understand that what we've been doing in the having and the doing part of our survival, when it becomes destructive to the being, you know, then it's no longer, that is to me the lie, if you want to say a lie, and I think the lie can only be spoken of in human terms, you know, that the lies that we tell ourselves are about what we really need, what we need physically to survive, and what we need to do to get that. Those are the lies, if they are destructive of the being, and if in my opinion the being wants to live in love and as close to oneness as possible, that experience of connectivity, whether it's with an individual that you love or sensing it more externally, you know, as a way of of knowing that other people are being taken care of and wanting the best for them. I mean, it's all down to the fact that we've gotten lost. I mean, kind of like, I guess maybe the Bible describes, or, you know, just like in falling into, I hate to use the word, but I am, just bear with me, meat suits. You know, we are having these experiences, and we need to remember, as in put ourselves together again, who we are and why we're here. And if we don't do that, if we don't realize our reason for being, or as French like to call it, raison d'être, and the French certainly know how to bring a certain amount of pleasure to life, you know, and connection, then we are lost, because that is the loss is the loss of our own awareness of what we are. So that's,
I just find it incredibly tragic that in order to remain physically embodied and survive at all, it is kind of necessitated by nature to kill and eat other beings with varying degrees of sentience. The whole thing is kind of messed up, in my view.
well, I don't think we have to kill and eat other beings. I mean, there's a lot
I
of
mean,
beings out
have
there.
you tried not eating at all?
No. Well, I mean, if you're not eating meat and other, like you say, of sentient beings, but do you think that somehow you're put it? I forget what I'm talking about this, but if you've been, that you're somehow wrong to take up space and to be put on this planet, for example,
Oh, I don't
you
think
know,
I'm wrong. I just think that it is tragic that we find ourselves, trillions, quadrillions of us, in such a situation.
so if you didn't want to eat meat and you didn't want to eat, you know, anything other than vegetables, which I understand from what you're saying implies that there's a certain amount of sentience. Do you know that, I mean, do you know, are you sure that what they experience at your eating them, the vegetables, for example, is terrible suffering and pain? Are you sure of that?
I'm not absolutely certain of that, but plants do communicate and grow and respond and interact and send distress signals when they're bitten by caterpillars, for example, and they appear to have at least some degree of sentience.
All right.
Can I just
Yeah.
before you go too deeply into the point, the tragedy, like then what you said, Cole, actually inspired me a thought or an insight that if you're looking around yourself and everything is bad, the trees are dying, you know, the weather is messed up, you see broader society, you see denigration in the cities, those druggies, whatever, crime. But isn't that's a creation of our I'm just positing again that is a creation of our conscious being here, and that, like Darren said earlier, we can affect what's around us so we can actually change that. So, to rest in sadness about it is not the way to be. The way to be is to act for better in the best way you can.
I do think that wallowing in suffering and how terrible things are is definitely counterproductive in that it just adds one additional suffering being to the mix and doesn't really help anyone. But at the same time, if I had a massively expanded awareness and was aware of kind of everyone and everything that existed here, at least locally on Earth, it would not resemble kind of personal self and like a phaneron, like the five senses, but it would be multiplied massively by trillions or quadrillions, depending on what you refer to as sentient.
But again, you're lamenting your lack of not being omnipresent, not being the complete God.
Not lamenting it. I'm just
we are like there's like I'm sure some of you here know this, but we have more capabilities than the five senses and the the physical beings that we are.
right.
So, and we are, as being the higher conscious beings on this planet, we are the ones that have been given the ability to make the changes for good or for bad. So when we see around us the degradation of both nature and our living places, then we must find, we could find it within ourselves to act on that and make it better.
Absolutely.
You know about Findhorn, right? The Findhorn, I guess everybody probably does. That's where they went and they grew these giant vegetables bigger than any place else ever. And you know about talking to plants, and basically this was a spiritual community that kind of did that, I believe. I don't know a lot about them, but I know they did. And I don't know. I mean, if you are vegetarian or vegan and you're not causing any animal to suffer either through its conditions or by eating it, that I mean, plants are our parents. They came first. They birthed us. Their seeds are carried around by animals eating them so that they can proliferate, and we do their bidding. So I mean, and the fruits that plants produce are not suffering from our eating them. You know, perhaps, who knows? But I mean, I know there's a sentience, of course, and a consciousness, absolutely. But I don't know if you need to worry about plants screaming by eating them, because I don't really think that's how it works. I don't think they would be, but of course, loving and
I
tending to
respectfully
anything.
disagree.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I need, and it's just a continuation of the life.
I'd like to speak to this problem. I've been away from the mic a little bit. Had to do a couple things, but I know Naoko well. We are close friends. I invited him to the meeting, and Naoko has a specific concern, which I don't want to minimize. However, I do want to examine some disparate features of this concern, and the concern goes something like, and Naoko, feel free to correct me, this big experiment that we call existence is bad. It's bad because whatever's organizing it doesn't seem to be concerned with alleviating suffering and generates a whole bunch of suffering and new ways of suffering all day long, every day. That being must not be. Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't think all of existence Wow, that's a lot of feedback.
Go
I
ahead.
don't think all of existence is bad or terrible or unethical, but certainly, at least on Earth, there's just an unimaginable amount of suffering in many instances of beings, and nothing really rescues them,
Okay,
except maybe death.
let me address that somewhat.
Sure.
So, and by the way, I'm trying to mute my mic whenever I stop talking to minimize feedback because I'm having to record on the local machine. I don't have any other way to do it since I was unable to find a way to cause the recording to happen. But nonetheless, all right. So there are a bunch of atheists running around like God's bad because he lets children get chopped up and tortured and animals tortured and everything's being tortured. And it's not untrue that things are experiencing torture. That part is actually going on. I'm not arguing that. However, we don't know what the actual situation is. If there is even an actual situation, the situation may be the interplay of myriads of probabilities and possibilities, which I think is probably likely. And I can suggest some scenarios that might be going on. But one of the things I could do is say that I could make the leap and say waking consciousness is the cause of all suffering. Not God, not humans, none of that. In order for there to be suffering, you got to be awake. So waking consciousness is actually the lethal star that causes all the torture and blah, 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 blah. And I could make a sophisticated argument around that, even though I'm using it rather trivially at the moment. But notice that dreaming is pretty weird, right? Because things don't actually suffer in dreams that we can know. Also, I've had an experience of a position in awareness, which I think is probably tripartite due to this experience. I won't go in depth into the experience, but I'll just say briefly that during a sleep paralysis event, there were three positions that I was aware of in consciousness. One of them was the me in the dream itself, which was literally being crushed together as if there was some gravity source inside my body that was causing me to compress into myself, and my bones were breaking and I was terrified and it was horrible. Above that was a position that was an absolutely impartial observer, just watching. No response, no reaction. Above that was some kind of an exploding light show, vaguely similar to the Tao symbol in the colors of a box of Tide detergent that was pulsing. And so what I'm trying to say here is complicated. The first thing I'm trying to say is that if there's a God, it doesn't go around repairing bad situations in material existence. That's not what it's up to, right? And similarly, you could also easily say, right, that the sun is bad because of the sun, there are tortures and torturers and the tortured. And let me be really clear, there is agonic experience in living beings. Living beings experience pain. There is agonic experience in living beings. But how we think about that requires, I think, an array of unique perspectives, depending not on some authoritative perspective in a superposition over all of existence, but rather in direct relational concern with and for other beings. So, for example, Israel isn't a being, right? That's a construct. That's like kind of like a demon that captures human beings and gets them to do things. So is the United States. So is Palestine. But what Israel is doing, quote unquote, if this process can be said to be acting and or be responsible for actions, is obliterating humans and like killing children and women and all kinds of things out of some bizarre supposition, out of an array of bizarre suppositions that are entirely unjustifiable. And I could say this is because of the sun. If that darn sun weren't up there, none of that would be happening. Or I could say, this is because of God. This is God's fault. God made everything, and he didn't care, she or he or they didn't care to make it nice. They just made it possible for it to be horrifically bad for billions of beings. All those things can be said. However, I think, quote, what's going on, unquote, and it isn't a what that's going on, it's a who or an us. So the us that's going on is very complex, and it's the nature of its origin, expression, process, existence is profound. Now, my own experience of this origin is that it is good and ethical and beautiful, but that doesn't preclude pain or suffering or even agony or torture. It doesn't preclude rape. It doesn't preclude murder. And somehow, in the bizarre complexity of that which is, of we who are, these features of existence serve some crucial and I would argue beautiful purpose. Now, I know this is a very dangerous thing to say. I get it. It's really, really dangerous. People are going to, if ordinary people heard me, they'd be like, you're justifying murder and bad things. Okay. I'm not trying to justify anything. What I'm saying is there's a perspective above where we normally lurk from which agony and torture and pain and suffering are intrinsically not merely redeemed, they are themselves redemptive. They make a transformation in the manifold of being that is crucially important, profound, possibly even holy. That doesn't mean we go around engendering them. It means that we look with curiosity and wonder. It means that I do anyway. I look with curiosity and wonder on the pain and the suffering and the agony and the tormentor and the tormented. I look with wonder and loving kindness upon them. And I don't merely leap to simple ethical critiques. Now, let me now that I've formed that little glass of water of ideas, I want to say a couple of other things. Similar to what Mick was saying. Surely I am offended by beings harming other beings. I'm offended when I'm harmed. I would like to interfere in or intervene in situations in which beings are harming other beings. I am particularly upset about what I've seen going on in the Middle East and in Ukraine and in all kinds of places that aren't right on the tip of the news. One of the things I would say about those things is that it's only been possible for humans to think of, quote, the world, unquote, for a very short period of the developmental time of our species. Perhaps less than 1,000 years, maybe a little bit more. And probably more like, in the way that we think of the world, that's only been possible for about maybe 300 years. So for most of human history, it was impossible for you to know, for example, that people in distant places were suffering, or that the rainforests of the Amazon were being burned down for soy plantations or cattle grazing stuff, or that humans were ripping the oceanic ecologies to shreds, or spraying fucking Monsanto chemicals that, fuck up our hormones and our biological molecules forever. Yeah, no, that was impossible for most of human history, and I would argue that we are not set up to be able to relate with that purview intelligently or effectively, or to remain healthy when subjected to the incredible burden of agony and badness that we know, that we are informed of via the media and other people. And this leads to an even worse thing, which is now there's always been some portion of misinformation or disinformation in the media. There's always been some spin, but now we have stuff that's pure fiction, right? It was made up just to manipulate us. There's no spin, it's all spin. So we have that too. It's very hard for a compassionate, loving, sensitive being to exist in any kind of healthy way while being aware of, for example, the suffering that animals are exposed to, or the obliteration of the anciently conserved ecologies, or, you know, children being exploded in Gaza. I mean, there's no way to cope with that. What do you do? What's the right move? I'm not claiming there is a right move, but what I'm trying to say is we have to take into consideration that we're not equipped for this. And we also have to take into consideration that when we form a cohort like we're doing here, which is amazing, and I'm so grateful for it, and I honor each of you for being here, and your uniqueness and your humanness, then and only then do we have the ability to become different from what the humans are doing. Remember earlier in the conversation, we were talking about certain kinds of conspiracies, okay? The conspiracy, for example, between a doctor, a patient, a medicine, and the context in which those roles are enacted. And one of the things that we are trained to do, and that I think is very tragic and disempowering, is that we act like separated spectators, commenting on atrocity, even when we're here together, forming a unity which could actually affect the world, history, the future. Right? We're so used to being isolated, which is, by the way, for most of human history, fucking impossible. Right? There's no such thing as an individual a couple thousand years ago. And I don't know how old our species are, but we're a lot older than that. So the idea of an individual is a terrifying idea. It's an abstraction, a literal subtraction of a human being from everything that is important to being human. And one of the problems that occurs when we are abstracted in this way and we are rendered into individuals is we think things. Let me be really clear about something briefly. This whole thinking thing, thinking is to a mind as being nailed to a rock is to a bird. That is not what our minds are for. Our minds are not for sitting around thinking things. Thinking is a symptom of isolation. What our minds are for are communion. They're for forging the third way together in real time, which I like to think we at least have the opportunity to do here. And that's something that I'm always wanting and can do very effectively with a small group or even one other person. So that goal post is much nearer at hand than we imagine. And one of the problems I have for myself, and I notice other people have it too, though I'll speak about myself, is I tend to cling to my pet biases, shoulder chips on my shoulder, things I was hurt by or make me mad or I don't understand. And so that when I get into a group, what might happen to me sometimes, less so these days as I'm older now, is that I really just play the broken record of my upsets, the things that irked me or hurt me, or that I don't understand, or that I resent. And I was writing the other night after having an amazing talk with someone, and then I said that when we're with people who are largely absent, what's important is being bright. And when we're with people who are coming into presence together, what's important is to be more beautiful together each moment. And I just don't want us, while we're here today, I would like, if we did something else, to cling to our pet biases and previous positions and resentments and so forth. And look, if it's important, let's get it on the table and talk about it. But we have in this moment this unique opportunity of being together and seeing and learning together in a way that I think is astonishing and beautiful. Let's take the wildest kind of advantage of that to whatever degree we're able.
I agree wholeheartedly. I'm gonna add a suggestion that when people are out and about, people here on this group, that they observe, even if they're not in good surroundings, they observe things of beauty or moments of beauty. because you can build on that. And I'm obviously very interested in what Darren is saying about, you know, this communion of groups, what they can do together. So, yeah, that's all.
It's not just the observation of beauty, it's the becoming beautiful together with and for each other and the history and future of all beings. I know that sounds like a kind of tall order, but it's not tall at all. We can do it instantaneously. The moment that we agree, it starts to happen. The only real thing that's required is our agreement that we'd like to go in that direction together. And we can bring up and discuss and dissect the problems of the planet, the problem of the humans, all the dark things that plague us. We can look at those, but we'll be able to see them from above rather than from within. And, or, you know, rather than from the perspective of a separated person inside a fucking nightmare machine. And that is how it really feels to be a human for lots of humans right this moment. And to some degree for me. I mean, a few months ago, I met a young woman. We've been friends on Facebook for a long time. And this goes back to Mick's question about parts and what happens when they're lost and so on. We've been friends on Facebook for some time, and I saw a post of hers that clued me in that it alerted me that something really bad had happened in her life. So I went to her, we'd never spoken or texted or anything. I went to her page, we were just Facebook friends. I went to her page and I saw that in November she was on a freeway and there was an accident up ahead, and so the traffic had stopped and she had to slow down very rapidly and stop her car, and she was worried that perhaps people behind her wouldn't be able to stop in time. Unfortunately, the person behind her wasn't even aware that traffic had slowed down, probably looking at their smartphone or drunk or both, or who knows what they were up to. It smashed into the back of her car and it shattered her spine, and she was paralyzed from the chest down. Now, I've learned some astonishing things from conversing with this woman, because what we do when we converse isn't, we don't just talk about trouble. We make that third mind. Suddenly I'm beyond Darren and I can see into the history of her and me and us and the world in a whole new way, as if some kind of star was being born that sheds light, whose light isn't mere illumination, it's insight. And so when we're together, I can see in all kinds of ways that I can't see when I'm by myself. And the same is true with each one of you. Naoko and I, we've had astonishing conversations. Nancy and I, our first conversation was amazing. We've had a number since then, mostly here. I haven't had a private conversation with Beast yet, I don't think, or Mick, maybe one, can't remember. But what I'm trying to get at is, you can lose part of yourself and still have it, right? My friend Amber, she doesn't mind me mentioning her name. We've already been through this. She can't feel anything from the chest down. She can't use her legs, probably ever again, right? They're still alive, but she can't, there's still biology, right? There's still living biology, but her capacity to interact with them with her awareness ends at one of her vertebrae. Now, someone else that I'm very close to is in a very similar situation. In fact, I really couldn't be closer to that person. Very similar. Not exactly the same. So, the problem of suffering is profound, and the problem of part and whole is profound. And we can gain insight into those matters together if that's our goal. But we have to carefully organize, I think, our motivations, because purpose produces process that leads to progeny, and the progeny are what we think and see and believe. And we should be really careful about that last thing, belief, except in a pretty limited scope of, I believe that my desk is physical and isn't going to just become a different thing or disappear in the next few moments. But yeah, we can, when we bring our minds together with the intention to learn, to see beyond what we've seen before, to resist the preservation of our pet resentments and biases and figurations of reality and existence and the humans and so forth, then we have the chance to fly. And I'm not very interested in being nailed to the cross of my history or my biases. I want to learn. I want to go where I've never been before. And our minds, humans think a lot, the humans, some of them, they think a lot about flying through space and stuff. That's not even vaguely interesting compared to what we've got right here. Because what we've got right here is everything. Everything. Everyone is here. Everyone before us, everyone after us. Every star, every planet, every world, they are right here. Again, it's this problem of the stuff we think is outside us. And we think it's outside in space, but we also can think it's outside in time. So I'm just so excited to have the chance to take off the costume of my individuality with you and learn to see and grow and play and explore together. That's what I think is absolutely amazing. And I trust it. I really trust that.
Please write this down from the beginning of the time you spoke about it. If you would, I know you have the recording down.
Yes, presuming nothing bad happens with the recording, I will try that.
Okay. What you said about I just seen something recently about how basically living in a city is psychosis. In and of itself, people become psychotic, literally from living in a city, in the sense that we weren't meant to live with any more than like 200 people that we knew at a time. Because once you go beyond that, people just stand by when things happen that they would never stand by if they, were in a circumstance where they knew the people, whether it's an accident or whatever. So, yeah, I think if you wrote this down, it would be right.
Yeah, you were talking about the bystander effect.
Yeah. But it doesn't occur if people, that bystander is basically that, like somebody who's not psychotic, I'm sorry. What do you call it? Somebody who's a psychopath. It's a psychopathic thing or a sociopathic thing that you become, not me necessarily or you, but people in general become when they live with too many people where they feel they can't do anything about anything. It all starts locally, and I think that, it's just, if you, love locally and do what you're describing locally, that makes a big difference. And it's really funny to say this, that you said today about your pet, the pet ideas and things like that. And I had a real realization this morning, and I was thinking maybe they'll talk about this, maybe, because there does seem to be synchronicity between things for me, at any rate, when things are, true, certain sense of the word, but I can see how my focus on people's awareness about being as opposed to doing and having is directly proportional to some, not that it isn't true, but to my own lack of doing that myself.
I'm
let's
sorry, go ahead.
let's not stand by. Let's as suggested by Darren, let's come together in the form of communion of our giving our life, sharing our life force, our attention and good intentions towards Amber and Darren's friend, that they may feel that life force through them and it may aid or improve their situation in some way.
Oh, I love that. Yes, yes, please. Let's just have a moment and direct our communal mind to both of those beings. and their healing. It's easy for me to cling to my isolation and my separation. Now, in this phase of my life more than ever, because I'm very isolated at the moment. And yet, at the same time, in a way, in the way that being awake charges the possibility of dreaming, in that same way, my isolation charges what takes place when I come together with other minds. And almost never do I just stay like, oh, I'm just going to be Darren. That almost never happens. Like, I don't know what happens, but it's the kind of a thing that happens in a chrysalis or a cocoon. Not that a caterpillar isn't fucking amazing. A caterpillar is amazing. If you pointed your finger at the sky, right? And you traveled in a line 10 million light years long across that angle that you're pointing in the sky, your chances of encountering a caterpillar, probably zero. I mean, it's like a decimal point with 10 million zeros and then a 1 at the end. You're not going to find a caterpillar, right? Time space is amazing and it's vast, but what it doesn't have is what we got here, caterpillars. And they make these things we call chrysalises in English, or cocoons. And what happens is, like, when I'm getting ready to go together with some others, is I go into that chrysalis, and what comes out the other side, it sure as hell ain't me. I mean, it's using my mouth, and it utilizes Darren's body and his memories and his ideas and stuff. But one of the weird features of that is that, I know this is a strange thing to say, but I have memories of having an angel's mind with mine, and I have memories of thinking the way that angels think. And what I mean by angel isn't that regular thing in the Bible. It's some kind of transcendental intelligence, or maybe even it's the logos. And so when we're talking, I try to get the hell out of the way and let the transcendental intelligences that I remember being with come and sing and play and speak and learn and grow and shine light on things. And every one of us has this. You don't have to be me to have this. We all have this. We have like these layers far above our personal identity from which we can participate in relation, in conversation, in exploration, discovery, in healing, in wonder, in awe, in play, in astonishment, in beauty. And I absolutely believe in that. And I also believe that I can't stop Israel. I can't stop grocery stores and the slaughterhouses, but I might be able to affect the situation, or maybe we might be able to affect the situation in a not directly physical interventionist fashion by how and when we come together and what we do when we do.
Beautifully put.
I wholly agree.
Aye, aye.
So we have an agreement here. Seems like pretty much everybody here agrees. And there are some things that are so amazing and beautiful that everybody will agree. You know, people say things like, well, you can't change the world. The humans are all fucked up and they're doing these bad things and they're not going to stop them. Yeah, we might not stop them. We might not be able to intervene mechanically. But what if we changed the valence of the field, of the mind, of the network of minds in which we participate by just adjusting the polarity, the purpose of coming together? We have these things called churches, which are really weird. Um, but there's something beyond a church where humans could come together momentarily and just become like so much more human than they've ever been over the past months and weeks and years and hours of their lives. And like actually be alive together, even for an hour. And that kind of a thing, when it happens, it sends shockwaves through the entire network of human minds. The problem is we're coming together for the wrong reasons. Social media draws us together to like shit or object or, you know, be triggered or whatever, triggered in one of 19 ways, or be primed to buy something or, you know, whatever, right? But we could prime each other for something that actually matters. And I like to think that's what we're up to here. And yes, I'm playing, you know, preacher on the pulpit a bit. I'll admit it, I am. But somebody's got to. Like the pulpit's there. Let's put something interesting up there somehow. So yeah, human. When I was with the angel, one of the things it said is, and of course it never actually spoke. It just made my mind. It structured my awareness alike with its awareness by its proximity, sort of like that morphological field stuff in the Sheldrake thing that Nancy mentioned earlier, or morphogenic fields, excuse me. It structured my mind by its proximity, but one of the things that I became aware of that it saw was that one of the greatest powers human beings have is agreement. And that's what's being mediated by social media. When we're participating in that, we're mostly making a bad mistake. And if we're not participating intelligently, we're also making a bad mistake. So it's not just like it's only bad, but it's really bad in what it's doing to the humans and the network of their minds. We need to do something different from that dramatically soon. But my point is just that when we agree with something truly beautiful, that makes medicine for all beings, and they all get interested. Every one of my ancestral mothers wakes up for a moment in her grave and was like, did he just do, he did what? He did something so beautiful that it woke me up from, you know, I'm making a joke kind of, right? But yeah, the beings of history and the beings of the future, they are watching us with great interest and concern. And they're hoping that like, we're going to sit up in the crypt of modern civilization and do something fucking amazingly beautiful. They're aching for it. That's what they worked and sweated and suffered for. That one possibility that we could become, that their children could become beautiful together and liberate and heal and adore each other and wake up together and come into insight and awareness. I know this is starting to sound like a church sermon. I really believe in these things. I'm not reading from the script.
That's obvious. I mean, really, you know, I mean, I know I just said this. If there's any way you can write up the intention, I think this is the intention for the group. I don't think anybody would disagree with that, but maybe I'm wrong. Voice your objections. But I mean, I do think that is the intention of the group, and maybe this is just a thought. Maybe we could in our initial, when people come on board to the group, we could have it as that silent connection of I mean, I'm gonna say the word prayer, although it's intention, you can call it whatever you want, just like we did a moment ago for your friend and whoever else. You know, maybe there's some way we can also create a group mind in our intention to connect and have the right beauty come from the group, you know, and that it's not so much that it's so important that we talk about things, you know, that we're focusing on, although that could be too, but more start with a feeling, more start with a connection, more start with the kind of thing that you're talking about, Darren, you know, as a beginning to, you know, to kind of start the day, so to speak. I don't know if anybody's open to that or they think that's a good idea at all. But that's just a thought.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yes. In fact, you reminded me that Sophie used to have sort of an introductory moment, and I got involved in that. And we should have a kind of an introductory moment and also a closing moment. And, you know, previously I was, I had concerns about taking over the Distinctionati, Lord Hugh historical pirate ship. Um, but I think those concerns have mostly gone away and we can just do whatever the hell we want. So yeah, we should maybe forge a new desiderata, a new manifesto, and um, and mention some of these things. I like that idea. I'm going to walk away from the mic for a couple minutes. I'll be back. Feel free to take a break, or you know, we might wind up soon if there's no further interest. But I'll be back in like 5 minutes.
Actually, I'm actually going to. Sorry, there's feedback. I'm going to stop now because it's late now. I have to go.
Great to see you,
So
Mick.
thanks a lot, everyone.
Much appreciation, man.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
I should go as well. It was very nice chatting, though.
All right, let's do the closing very briefly before you take off, Naoko.
Sure.
So what Sophie used to do, which I thought was really interesting, is she would say, "Let's just take a moment. We'll invent another one of our own sometime soon, but let's just take a moment to be together and wash away all of the history and everything that was said and everything we thought and felt, and just cleanse. Let's be free together inside for a moment."
So good being with you all. Thank you.
Thank you. You're amazing. Much love to all of you, and do it again next Sunday, 11:30 a.m. PST. Be there or be something. Much love. Peace out.
Take care.